Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Thursday, September 8th, 2022, and today we are going to be talking about what these special elections passed the Dobbs v. Jackson decision that effectively overturned the long-term precedent Roe v. Wade, the landmark Supreme Court decision that enshrined or protected rights to abortion across the United States. Following that decision from the United States Supreme Court, there have been 5 major special elections ranging up across the nation, from Alaska to New York, all of them showing significant improvements for one political party, and it's not necessarily the party that you would expect. Looking at the Dobbs decision and what its impact was in the United States, essentially, it completely changed the direction of the midterm elections. In national polling data and President Biden's approval rating in terms of everything that we have seen as an indicator for the upcoming midterms, the Democratic Party has started to do significantly better than they would have previously. The Dobbs decision also ranked abortion as something that the American voter now had to care about when it came down to who they were voting for this November. From 1973 onward, the United States Supreme Court had protected the right to an abortion. So voters never really had to have major concern for it, and it had been tried and tested decade after decade after decade with the same exact precedent being held up until 2022. When the decision was released in June, the American public made it very clear in opinion polls and overall advocacy efforts that they did not support the pro-life initiatives by the Supreme Court or the Republican Party. Now, as much as we would like to say the Supreme Court is a nonpartisan court, obviously that is not true, and the precedent that again had been tried and tested was overturned by a significantly more conservative court. In a vote of 6-3, Roe v. Wade was overturned, and Dobbs v. Jackson, or a vote of 5-4 actually, and Dobbs v. Jackson was released in terms of its decision, in which now voters had to go to the ballot box and will go to the ballot box this November with the idea that abortion access could be on the line. Now, we knew that there would be these special elections well before the Dobbs decision, but I can't say that many people expected much from the Democratic Party in any of them. But in every single every single special election post-Dobbs decision, you find that the Democratic Party outperformed significantly across all of these races by a minimum of 6 points and a maximum of 18 percentage points. The Democratic Party's performance across all of these districts was a very skillful display of how organizing efforts and utilizing the national environment that has changed from where it was months ago in your advantage can win you elections. The Democratic Party, in fact, flipped a special election, flipped a congressional district in the state of Alaska, holding it for the first time since, ironically enough, 1972, before Roe v. Wade was into power. Meaning that the entire time that Roe v. Wade was the precedent established by the Supreme Court, Alaska was held by one singular congressman, a Republican, who never once lost re-election. And that ended after the Dobbs decision. It's ironic, but it's also something to be said that looking at what we have seen in all of these special elections, it is very clear that the impact was the United States Supreme Court decision, and you can see it to be true in the pre-Dobbs decision special elections and the post-Dobbs decision special elections as well. I keep switching up between Supreme Court and special elections. I'm starting to merge them together. But we can take a look at what that shift would actually mean on the national level. But before we do that, I want you to see again just how much of a change this actually is in terms of an overall shift. Taking a look at some of these special elections around the time that President Biden became disapproved of, you started to see a more dramatic shift in favor of the Republican Party, but you really only saw it in mid-2022. The rest of these elections were really just not competitive. Florida's 20th was Democrat plus 53, ended up being Democrat plus 60. Ohio's 15th was Republican plus 19, ended up being Republican plus 17. Ohio's 11th, Democrat plus 57 to Democrat plus 58. I mean, these districts, none of them were competitive, except for potentially Texas's 6th, in which the Republican Party significantly outperformed, outpaced the Democrats, and locked them out of a jungle primary that would inevitably run into a runoff election, which ended up being between two Republicans. But looking at the special elections in California's 22nd and Texas's 34th, the California special election was a significant improvement for the GOP, but again, nobody was too heavily focused on that race. But the Democrats actually held Texas's 34th, and they were focused on it. They wanted to win this district. It was a district that the Democrats won by double digits in the last House election, and Republicans flipped it and won by 5. A 10-point shift across the district by partisan lean and actual vote margin, bringing the pre-Dobbs average in its entirety, Republican plus 2. The post-Dobbs average is Democrat plus 11. An 11-point margin on average in advancement for the Democratic Party, a super significant one, might I add, and one that, if applied to our national map, would hand the Democratic Party an overwhelmingly large advantage in the House of Representatives. And we can see that now. The map I'm showing you right now is a map that was conjured up by a Twitter user. I will link their Twitter handle down below for credit for this map. Essentially, what they did was applied the PVI to these districts and looked at the shift from the post-Dobbs decision special elections and applied that to our respective map. And looking at the final results here, what you have is a 250 to 185 seat advantage for the Democratic Party. It's not quite as large as where it was back in 2008, but it is essentially one of the largest House majorities for the Democratic Party in practically decades beyond 2008. And it's fascinating to reach this point where, the Democratic Party has this within not necessarily the realm of possibility, but has this within this realm of contemplation, that something like this could have happened had the average been applied. Now, every single district is different. There's no way of indicating that Democrats are going to have a uniform overperformance of 11 points simply because they did in special elections. But if we were to look at the pre-Dobbs special elections versus post-Dobbs, the very clear difference is so apparent, and it tells us that the special elections are indicators that the American public is moving in a different direction. Because it's not just the special elections that are telling us, it's the generic ballot, which now has the Democrats up by more than a point for the first time in nearly a year. It's the President Biden's approval rating that is narrowing down to single digits for the first time in months on end. The change in sentiment towards Biden, towards Democrats, and in special elections are telling us that the elections are better for Democrats than they were previously. And if the special elections were anything to be true, at least in terms of the average margin and shift, the Democratic Party would win effectively 250 seats to the Republican Party's 185. When you take out the overall shift from the state of Alaska, because I know some people are going to say, Sarah Palin was just an exceptionally poor candidate. Nick Begich would have been able to win that race easily. Don't read too deep into it. First of all, I will say that voters preference the way that they did. There is no way to say, there's something wrong about the way that they preference because you don't like the outcome. But what I will say is that, okay, for sure, let's take out Alaska and see what that shift ends up being. Instead of 11 points, it's 10 points. It's a 9.5% overall average, and it's one that the Democratic Party can certainly enjoy and say that they had in terms of a shift, even if you take out what many people would call a fluke in the state of Alaska. But on average, it really isn't a fluke. It was a very significant performance for the Democratic Party, and that cannot be overstated. Yes, Sarah Palin was a bad candidate, but I can't say that this is nowhere, not in part because Democrats are performing better. And also Alaska is very much a pro-choice state when it comes down to it. So looking at the overall shift in all of these districts, on average, you find that the Democratic Party knows what their winning strategy is, and they are recognizing that. And so is the mainstream media. The Democratic Party has momentum after this point. Republicans, quite frankly, do not. The change in sentiment, the change in ratings, everything is telling us that Democrats are doing better than they were doing yesterday. As the days go on, the Democratic Party's chances at winning control of the House go up, winning control of the Senate go up, winning control of different governorships go up. And you can find that to be true with a very clear and consistent, steady rise for the Democratic Party from what was a very low and abysmal chance in some of these ratings. For instance, on the House elections, you take a look at the middle of this forecast, June, July, you found that the Democratic Party peaked at a 17% chance and averaged around a 12% chance at winning control of the House. Today, that is over double at 26%, and Republicans are at 74%. It's a narrow increase for the Democratic Party, and if it continues at this rate, it will not converge in time for the midterm elections. But it will bring the Democratic Party to a point where potentially they could be at a 35% chance at maintaining control of the House, and a 35% chance is honestly quite good when this is the narrowest House majority of the 21st century. And you also find the narrowest Senate majority of the 21st century, or the narrow Senate majority possible in U.S. politics altogether in 2022 as well. And yet the Republican Party is not the favorites to win the Senate race. I want us to take a look back at 2010 and 2014 to recognize exactly how insane it is that the GOP is not in a position where they are on track to win control of the Senate. In 2008, the Democratic Party had 59 to 41 seats. In 2010, the Republican Party reduced that down to a margin of 53 to 47. The Republican Party picked up, essentially, based off of Arlen Specter switching, you're talking 7 seats here, 6 seats at a minimum. 6 seats flipping in favor of the Republicans. You go to 2012, the Democratic Party expands their majority. They win in areas where they otherwise wouldn't. Well, guess what happens? You go to 2014, and what do you find? That the Democratic Party loses seats, in fact, loses the Senate majority, and Republicans pick up not just 6 seats, not just 7 seats, but 9 seats from the Democrats. 9 seats in totality. It is crazy to think that at this point you are looking at a significant improvement for the GOP, and just 8 years later, they can't even get 1. 6 to 7 seats in 2010, 9 seats in 2014, and you fast forward to 2022, and the Republican Party is struggling. Not only struggling, but not even the favorites to do it, whereas previously they were. And what was my argument? That as the days went on, the Democratic Party rose in chances. If this continues, you are talking about nearly above an 80% chance at victory ahead of November. Just such an abysmal showing for the Republican Party. And if you were to apply this overall shift in the Dobbs decision special elections to the Senate elections, take a look at this map. Not only is it as bad as this one, in fact, it's significantly worse. If all of the states were to go the way they were, based off of the Dobbs decision special election average, the Democratic Party would win 56 seats to the Republican Party's 44. 56 to 44. That would be the largest majority for the Democratic Party since 2008. It would be the largest House majority for the Democrats since 2008. And to think that we have a president of the United States who is disapproved of by practically double digits, being at a point where you have the Democratic Party leading by no more than a point on the generic ballot, yet somehow the special elections and the data shows that Democrats could be in a position where they win by a margin such as this. It is crazy to even consider that at this point. I mean, looking at the 56 to 44 possibility in the Senate is really just shocking, to say the least. But also, in a way, it isn't. The GOP made a mistake. The Republican Party made a mistake in this Dobbs decision. Sure, it will well outlast the midterm elections. I don't doubt that for a bit. These Supreme Court justices, quite frankly, are not going anywhere. But what is going somewhere are these seats. And the Democratic Party can find a way to go around the United States Supreme Court, because quite frankly, they don't need them. If Democrats were to get a majority such as this, Roe v. Wade would be put into national law. Sure, it could eventually go up to the Supreme Court, but I would not put it past the Democratic Party from passing consistent bills to lag the process in the Supreme Court, to try to ensure that abortion access is allowed across the United States. And what's to say, the Democratic Party doesn't continue using this point. Abortion also is not going to be a one-time issue. Yes, it will fizzle out in terms of priority, but it will always be in the back of the minds of voters, whereas otherwise it never even had to be a consideration. Yes, voters were candidates were pro-life, pro-choice as well, but voters weren't looking to that as a top 3 defining factor as to how they were voting. And while people will always argue that we will revert back to the economy, we will revert back to healthcare, yes, that is true. Abortion will not be the number one issue for the entirety of the rest of our lives until a new Supreme Court decision. But what I will say is that it will still be up there, and people are still going to think about that. Being pro-life and being pro-choice does not extend solely to the 2022 midterm elections. This is just the first of midterm elections in which we will get a better indication, in which, in fact, there will be significant ramifications for the politicians that are elected this time around. Future elections probably will not be as significant, but what I will say is that without the protection of Roe v. Wade, pro-choice voters are still always going to be subliminally inclined to vote for the Democratic Party, just based off of policy, just based off stance. It doesn't mean that they will. I don't think the Democratic Party is going to get 59% of the vote, but what we have seen in these special elections is that Democrats absolutely are performing better. And looking at the change and looking at what that shift would actually mean for House and Senate elections, you find it to be true that the Democratic Party does use this effectively and also has a good outlook for the midterm elections if this continues onward. Because the Democrats were at a point where they were absolutely losing nationwide. And now they're the favorites to win the Senate, and it calls into question the possibility that they do win the House. I don't think it happens. I think it's extremely unlikely, but what I will say is that the Democratic Party has definitely shocked me in many of these special elections, ones that I rated safe and solid for the GOP or likely that ended up flipping towards the Democratic Party. Alaska, New York's 19th, and I might be wrong about this as well. I still think the Republican Party will win the House, but I would not be, entirely super shocked if the Democrats win control of the House. And I would have never said that a month ago. I would have never said that, or 2 months ago. I would have never said that before. Right after Biden was elected, I said the House was immediately going to the GOP. But that, unfortunately for Republicans, does not seem to be the case in actuality for these midterms. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 House election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all later today.